All right, let's dig in. Hey, Nate, I know we already said hey offline, but here's the online one. So let's dig in. The issue we wanted to talk about today was the Philippines and its recent military and or defense agreements with its neighbors. There have been a number of them. There was an agreement with the U.S. on joint patrols, I believe, for the South China Sea, as well as the expansion of the EDCA and potential talks with Japan to do something similar, though maybe not the same thing. Can you run down each of these and just tell us first of all what's going on with this and maybe your thoughts on these?
Sure. Hello. So I think it might be useful to back up just a little bit. So of course, the new president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., came to office last year. Before that, there was a lot of uncertainty surrounding the U.S.-Philippine alliance, largely thanks to former President Duterte, who's rhetorically very anti-U.S. So since Marcos has taken over, a lot has happened to reinvigorate this alliance. Most importantly, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement that you just alluded to. This was a deal signed in 2014 under Aquino, which was the president before Duterte, and Duterte just stalled the whole thing. Marcos has revived it. Now, what that means is there are 5 sites in the Philippines designated for U.S. troops to, first of all, operate and cycle in and out, indefinitely, sort of not a permanent basing situation, but a de facto situation that is very similar to that, basically tantamount to it.
And they can also expand resources there too, like airstrips or help with the development of those bases. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, and that's what they probably will be doing, building out these facilities. The U.S. is allowed to build them out, at the designated sites. So there are 5 of them. That was in November. Recently, at the beginning of February, the United States and the Philippines agreed to expand the number of sites from 5 to 9. So the first 5 sites are known. They're sort of centrally located near Manila, one in Mindanao in the south, and then there's one facing the Spratly Islands. But these 5 new sites, although they're not disclosed yet, we think, the speculation is that they will be strategically positioned to face the South China Sea, Spratly Islands that are contested with China, and then Taiwan. That's the big one. So none of these bases currently face Taiwan, but we think that 1 or 2 of them, of these new ones, probably will. And I think people also tend to forget that the northernmost point of the Philippines is less than 90 miles away from Taiwan. So this puts the Philippines very much in the U.S. camp with regards to this whole, geopolitical competition with China, tensions over Taiwan. So you're kind of folding the Taiwan issue into the South China Sea issue when you're talking about the Philippines. So this has been a little long-winded. Let me continue though, because after reviving or expanding the EDCA, Marcos went to Tokyo to build out the relationship with Japan. Now that the first returns on that are economic in nature, which is also hugely important, infrastructure, development deals, that sort of thing. And they're working towards getting a reciprocal access agreement, which would allow troops to go into each other's countries, and eventually possibly a visiting forces agreement like what the United States has with the Philippines. So things are really moving in that direction. The Philippines is placing itself very firmly for now in this camp. So that's what's been going on. And the tensions with China in the South China Sea have been ongoing now for years, of course, but they're going to keep at it. China's not pleased with this. After these developments on February 6th, there was an incident where Chinese Coast Guard, I believe, or the PLA and PLA Navy, I'm not sure which one, to be frank, but one of the two shined a military-grade laser at the Philippine Coast Guard. This has been a big to-do. Some voices in the Philippines are claiming that this actually this constitutes an armed attack and reaches the threshold to activate the alliance with the United States and call it in for its defense commitment. So that's some pretty big escalatory rhetoric. The foreign ministry did say it's too early to do that, but the fact that people are talking about it should make people pay attention.
Right, and the U.S. has in the past, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, clarified that they would help the Philippines defend their interest in the South China Sea as part of the Mutual Defense Agreement. But the hitch, from my understanding, is exactly what constitutes an attack that would prompt defense, right? Just shining a laser in your eyes, does that prompt an attack versus, for example, taking a disputed feature by force? Would that prompt the U.S. to get involved?
So I think this is an open question. Obviously, since we have Philippine politicians asking this exact question, I think that there will be an effort, probably both in Manila and in Washington, to figure out exactly what constitutes the threshold for activating the defense commitments in the treaty. So that's a bit open to interpretation right now. But from the foreign ministry statement saying, quote unquote, it's too early, it would probably have to be something bigger than this laser incident. So taking a claimed feature, as you just said, that might do it. Some more, escalatory attacks that don't involve lasers, but bullets and bombs, perhaps. So the fact that this is getting clarified might provide a way forward that we can sort of figure out a de facto code of conduct, if you will, around this issue and what China might perceive that it's able to get away with, so to speak.
Yeah, I might push back a little bit on that just because I don't disagree. The US has sort of been on a trend over the last couple of years of sort of verbally clarifying what their defense obligations might be with certain partners like Taiwan or like the Philippines, but they really haven't pushed so far as to write it down, right? To say this is our policy. Because I think from the US standpoint, when you have the biggest military in the world and you have so many defense agreements with other countries, strategic ambiguity is still very much your friend. You don't want to let potential combatant nations like China know exactly what kind of activity would trigger your involvement, because then they will toe that line, right? They'll do everything short of that in order to get what they need in the South China Sea or desire. So I think the U.S., despite Philippines' protestations, they very much want the U.S. to clarify because they're the smaller party in this agreement. I think the U.S. is going to want to hold back, and they may continue to deepen their engagement with the Philippines in the South China Sea, but I think they're going to be loath to define exactly in what cases they would involve themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great caveat to all of this, is that the Philippines is definitely more interested in getting clarification here than the United States, because U.S. benefits, as you just pointed out, from the strategic ambiguity, and they would lose an edge by making this clarification. So there's some tension in that respect. Not to overblow it though. But you're absolutely right that that's a constraint on this whole thing. I am wondering from your perspective, what do you think that China makes of all of this, particularly roping in Japan with all of these security developments? What's China going to do? How do they feel about it? That sort of thing.
Well, I don't think China retaliates against this, so to speak, because that's the question that gets raised the most. I think it is certainly China's nightmare. This is something that, and we talked about this earlier this morning, it's sort of a fever dream that CCP constantly has, is, all of our neighbors are going to join an effort to contain us along with the United States, and then we won't be able to grow, and all of our plans will be thrown asunder. So when Beijing sees Japan buddying up with the Philippines and the US, getting closer with the Philippines as well, those visions definitely start bouncing around their minds. But I think their tact is going to be what it has been for the last few years, which is to try to grow closer to the Philippines, grow closer to Japan insofar as they can, and convince them like, hey, I realize you have concerns, but going nuclear, so to speak, by throwing your entire lot in with the United States, that's not in your interest, right? It's not in our interest. So let's try to make a common ground here. So I think they're definitely concerned about it, but I don't think they're going to retaliate, so to speak. But to your point earlier, the big implications of this, for example, in a Taiwan scenario, are much the same for the Philippines, right? If the U.S. and Japan have more access agreements, potentially more troops or more military assets in the Philippines, those would definitely be a target for China in the early rounds of a Taiwan war, because you have to knock out the US's ability to intervene early to stop the invasion, which if those assets are in Japan, and those especially southern Japan, which is a trend we haven't talked about yet, Japan moving a lot of their military assets from the north down to the south, sort of a belated civil or Cold War reaction. But nonetheless, so there's that threat of Japanese and Philippines territory getting hit here, and then bringing them into a Taiwan war and triggering mutual defense agreements as well. So yeah, it's a long chain of potentialities and maybes, but they are worth playing out, especially as the Philippines is looking to expand its relations in the region even farther than just the U.S. and Japan.
Sure. And I think another piece of this is the economic relationship. So, China's top trade partner, pretty much everybody in the region, but Japan has an in the Philippines economically. So, just brief background, President Duterte tried to get real close with China, made a bunch of infrastructure deals, but ultimately most of the arrangements that he made with Xi Jinping weren't delivered. And this caused them to sort of turn away from China. Whereas President Marcos, in his visit to Tokyo earlier this month, secured around $13 billion in trade and commercial agreements. Japan is building the metro in Manila, which is going to be the first public transportation of that sort in the country, which the Philippines needs very badly. Their infrastructure is underdeveloped. So if Japan, I guess the implication here is if Japan can actually follow through on these economic goodies that China had previously promised, that will help not only the Philippines develop economically as it wants, but really bring public sentiment around to the arrangement with Japan and the United States, because China has proven unreliable. China launches incursions into their exclusive economic zone, this, that, and the other. So the economics piece plays into this. Do you think that what can China do to compete in that arena, or where do they stand now, do you think?
That's a tough sell for China because they've really been backing off of BRI, Belt and Road Initiative financing, right? Including in places like the Philippines. So the Philippines is uh, by no means alone in its feeling that China didn't follow through on its promises, right? This is an issue in many regions of the world where China's pledged quite a bit through Belt and Road, and they're fine with constructing things and building projects, but of the last 5 years, the amount of financing that China's willing to give, which for countries like the Philippines is a big part of the deal. They need to finance it. That financing has been dropping off over the years. So it remains to be seen. China will continue throwing money at certain Belt and Road projects, like those in Pakistan, that are very strategically valuable to both the success of the BRI initiative and political plan, so to speak, and to gaining strategic access to distant waters. But they're going to have to pick and choose. And I don't know if the Philippines infrastructure projects really hit the top of China's financing list. We'll see, I suppose. If China does make a sort of full court press on the Philippines and say, no, let's renegotiate, we'll give you some financing, let's get these railroads, these ports, whatever they're wanting to build for the Philippines, let's get these going. That would be a sign that China really is quite concerned about the depth of the Philippines pivot away, or the extent of that pivot away from China and toward the US and Japan. So as far as the future, I guess that's something we can look for here.
For sure. And we definitely will. This is something we would track very closely.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to end it. Obviously, this won't stop. I think we're going to continue seeing more Philippines military developments. But thanks for covering it, Nate.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Chase.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yeah.